This video is going to graph y is equal to sine pi of x plus 1/3. The very first thing we're going to have to do is to go find the period. The period, remember, is 2 pi over omega, your frequency. In our case, it's whatever's in front of the x. So it's going to be 2 pi over pi, which is equal to 2. And from here, we're going to get our increments. We're going to get our period and divide that by 4. And we're going to find our increments are 1/2. Then we're going to get our start point. Our start point we get by doing x plus 1/3 is equal to 0. That's this part inside of our parentheses. When we solve that, we're going to find x is equal to a negative 1/3. Because I have different denominators, I actually want to make my increment and my start point have the same denominator. In this case, it's going to be 6. Our increment is going to be 3 over 6, and our starting point is going to be negative 2 over 6. So anywhere on my number line that I have here for x, I need to start my starting point at negative 2 over 6. Just to kind of stretch it out a little bit, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to skip a spot and go here, and I'm going to add my negative 2 over 6 plus my 3 over 6, which is 1 over 6. Then I'm going to do the same increment and add 3 over 6 to my 1 over 6. I'm going to get 4 over 6. Same spacing, I'm going to add my 3 over 6 to my 4 over 6 and get 7 over 6. Same spacing, I add again, I get 10 over 6. Same spacing, and I get 13 over 6. Same spacing, and add 3, I get 16 over 6. And I just keep on doing this however many times I need to do this. And I'm just going to go until I get to the end. So that's going to give me 21 over 6. Notice I am not reducing any of these numbers. So from our start point, that's where we notice that we don't have any up and down transformations. It's a sine wave and it's positive, so we're going to start on our sinusoidal axis, go up and down, and finish in our sinusoidal axis. So for our case, we're going to our start point, which is negative 2 over 6. And then the next point is going to be at its peak. We can see that our amplitude is 1. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to just go up 4 spaces and call that a 1. So from now on, this is 1. This is 0, my x-axis. And if I go the same amount, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is going to be negative 1. So our next increment, I will be at my sinusoidal axis. At the next increment, I'm going to be at my low point, and then at the next one, I'm back at my sinusoidal axis, so we can see that it's doing this. And then we start all over again. Go up to its peak, go to the middle, go to its valley, go to its middle, go to its peak, go to the middle, and we can see the rest of my sine graph looking like this. Make sure you add arrows at the end, and we can clearly see that we've done more than 2 cycles. So let's graph the next one. For this one, we're going to see that we're trying to graph the secant. So remember, secant is the same thing as the reciprocal of cosine. So what we're going to do is think about y is equal to 2 plus cosine of x minus pi over 3. And again, we're going to start off with the same information, which is our period. Remember, period for cosine is going to be 2 pi over our frequency, whatever's in front of our x, and we can see that's a 1. So our period is 2 pi. To get our increments, we're going to get our period, which is 2 pi, and divide that by 4. And that's going to give me pi over 2. Then we're going to look at our start point. Our start point, we go for x minus pi over 3. Set that equal to 0. And we find x is equal to pi over 3. Because we're trying to get them all on the same x-axis, we need to get the common denominator for these two fractions. So we're going to again see that this is going to be 6. This is going to be 2 pi over 6. and our increment is going to be 3 pi over 6. So we know where to start, so I'm going to come over here and say this is 2 pi over 6. And then I'm going to add, and I'm going to find that this is going to be 5 pi over 6. Remember, we're adding our start point with our increment, and now we're just going to keep adding our increment. So this is going to be 8 pi over 6. This is going to be 11 pi over 6. This is going to be 14 pi over 6. And I'm just adding the same number over and over again. And notice I'm doing the same increments, the same spacing between my notches. And I'm going to stop right here. Okay, so then the next thing I need to do is see that we have a sinusoidal axis of y is equal to 2. So I am going to go up here and say this is 2, which means down here is negative 2. And this is our 0, our x-axis. So I am going to put my sinusoidal axis in blue, which is going to be this guy right here. I'm going to put it dashed because we're going to pretend to graph our cosine right here. And then we're going to remember that cosine is going to be at its peak, go down, come back up at its peak. So what we're going to do is at our start point, we're going to make sure we go to our peak. Now remember, we're going to do 2 plus 1. That's going to be 3. So its biggest peak is going to be up here. The next number is going to be at its sinusoidal axis. The next one is going to be at its minimum. So I'm going to subtract 2 minus 1, which will give me 1. Then I'm going to go to the middle. Then I'm going to go to its peak, to the middle, to the bottom, to the middle, to the peak, to the middle, to the bottom. And then you can see that we're going to do that. So we could see that our cosine graph would look like this. Now, I'm not going to keep this cosine graph because we're not asked to graph the cosine. We're asked to graph the cosecant. So the secant. So in order to do our secant, what we find is that we're going to have asymptotes every time my cosine graph hit my sinusoidal axis. And then now we're ready to graph our graph. We're going to say that it's going to go this way. If it's at the up, you go up, and if it's at the bottom, you go to the bottom. If it's up, you go up, and if it's at the bottom, you go to the bottom. And that is how we graph secant. That concludes this video.